Yeah, cool. Okay. Right, guys. Happy New Year. This is the first session of 2018. So I remember when we kicked off these sessions, probably around the beginning of November, and I talked about being relaxed about your training. It was very much post-season. The emphasis was on strength. It was a little bit about giving back to family, or just doing a few of the things that maybe you don't get to normally do through the year. So and then I said that once we hit January, it's almost like a bit of a mindset change as we start to think about some hard work, and we're very much starting to do that at the moment. So we're into January. We're probably about 12 to 16 weeks away from our first races for most people. So the hard work is beginning, and hopefully you will have started to see, depending on where you are in your program, it ramping up, especially if you've managed to avoid Australian flu or whatever over the Christmas and New Year period. So we thought tonight we'd talk about performance management charts. It's a pretty full-on kind of subject. There's a lot of numbers, there's a lot of data. There's a lot of people who probably like the look of the chart but don't really understand what it's telling you at any one time. So we just thought we'd give you a better understanding of what it means, and how you should really be trying to take ownership of the chart. As coaches, we can do some of the work and ensure the sessions and your fitness are heading in the right direction, but I think you've got a little bit of ownership to do regarding making sure that the TSS for each session makes sense, because if you leave it for 4 to 6 weeks, it's a lot more difficult to trawl through the data and find out where all the anomalies lie. So it's good practice to, when a session's downloaded and you're adding comments back to the coach, just double check to make sure it makes sense. And then if you've got any questions, then put it onto the comments page, and the coach can have a look at it and see whether or not it does make sense or not. So, Phil, have you got anything to add at this stage?
No, I'd probably just say, the first thing we need to cover off really is like where TSS, training stress score, where does it come from? Like, where's it generated? So I don't know if you want me to
cover that off, or
sorry.
Do you want to cover off that bit then?
Yeah, I will do. Yeah. So, can you guys see my screen at the moment? I think I've got my screen.
Yeah, I can. Yeah.
Yeah, you can. Yeah. Okay. So basically, we obviously from time to time do tests, bike tests, run tests, swim tests. Looking at heart rate, power data, pace data. This is all imported into your settings within Training Peaks. By your coach, or the guys that follow the group plan sort of have a document as to how to input it themselves.
Can you just show us how you got to that page quickly?
Sorry, yeah. I'm actually in a coaching account here, Kemal. When you go, is it Kemal I'm speaking to?
No, Sean, but it's fine.
Sorry, Sean.
Kemal.
Similar accent, sorry. On yours, where I'm hovering over the name at the top there, where it says Total Tri Training,
yeah.
If you open that and go to settings in there, it will effectively do the same function as what I'm opening here. And then when I go to zones on the left, it opens up all the zones. So we set for each athlete a bike. This is what you should have in there. If you have power meter, GPS watch, etc., you'll have bike heart rate, and run heart rate because they tend to differ. You'll also have your bike power threshold, which is your 1 hour power, and then your 1 hour run pace as well in there. We'll come to the TSS on swim in a minute. It's a little bit more of a grey area because of the rest time you spend at the end of the lane. We'll cover that off as a separate thing. So once all these zones are set, you obviously on a daily basis then are, I'm obviously stuttering a little bit for anyone listening to the recording just because I'm just going to another page. As you upload your data into a, let's do an outdoor session just so we know it looks right. So when your data is imported from your watch, for example, on this run, it's looking at not just the average pace you've ran compared to your threshold pace, but actually all of the ups and downs within the session that you can see in the pace. And you know, there's all kinds of different paces shown in this session, and Training Peaks knows how to turn that data into this score here, which is your run training stress score of 79. So that was a fairly intense run.
Can I just ask a question?
Yeah.
Sorry. On my Training Peaks, my bike speed threshold is set at 6.7 miles an hour, and I like to think I go a bit quicker than that. Because obviously then it shows me it's been in zone 5C at all times.
Yeah,
pretty well.
Yeah, so on your, you shouldn't really have bike speed set in there. I'm not sure why that is, but
all right, okay.
It will pull power data first. In your case, as a second option, it will use heart rate data to generate the TSS. And then, yes, it might look at bike speed, which is obviously in there from a, I'm not actually sure why that's in there. We can talk about that separately. But
okay, thank you.
But yeah, basically, you really only want your heart rate and your pace or power data in there. So this is the kind of thing to just make sure, you know, like Chris said, you've got to like be on top of this to make sure the data's clean all the time going in. Does that make sense to everyone? Sort of where TSS is coming from?
So I'll just jump in and basically say that it's different for different sports in terms of where the data pulls from and what its preference is. So for biking, as Phil said, it will try and pull power first. If it doesn't have that, it will go to heart rate, and if it doesn't have that, it will go to bike speed. On the run, it will pull run speed first, and if it hasn't got run speed, then it will pull heart rate. And then from a swimming point of view, if you wear your Garmin watch and you tap it every time you stop and start, it will pull through the speed. If not, then you almost have to manually put in a number at the end if you don't wear your Garmin. And you probably heard us talking when we were talking about swimming, you know, the fact that maybe we don't actually like you wearing your Garmin. It's great in terms of pulling through your TSS score. However, in terms of skills of swimming and getting used to using the lap clock, then it's not that great. So in that instance, then we have to manually put in a TSS score every time we swim. And it's quite important because otherwise it will basically put through next to nothing. And it will basically go that if you've done an hour session and you've managed to get through 2,000 meters worth of swimming, it will think your average pace is 2,000 meters for an average swim, for that swim. And so it will pull through like a very low score, whereas actually you've probably been working a lot harder with, you know, some of the sets that we're kind of giving. So there's no hard and fast number, but what I would say is that if you've got in and you've done an hour's worth of swimming and you haven't really messed around for like a couple of minutes at the end of each set, and you've wasted sort of 15 minutes and actually only traveled 45 minutes, I would give yourself a score of around about 65. If you've done lots and lots of threshold swimming, if we got you to get in the pool, and it depends on your swim ability, but say I got in the pool and I had to get in and knock out 12 times 400 meters on turnaround of 6 minutes, I'd probably be up at like 75 or 80 from a TSS point of view. But in most instances, I would work to around about 65 TSS per hour. So if you've got like an hour and a quarter session, then put in around about 80 as a TSS, something like that. But 65 from a 65 per hour. Does that kind of make sense to people? Just shout if that doesn't. Sean, I know you had a question as I started to speak then.
I was just, is it out of 100?
Yeah, so I think, Phil, do you want to explain how we get to a score and how it will change over time?
Yeah, so you we set your thresholds. You know, you might have a bike power threshold of 275 watts. If you ride your bike for 1 hour at 275 watts, you'll get 100 TSS points for that hour. You ride it for 2 hours at that power, you would get 200 TSS points. But obviously, we would be questioning, how can you ride your bike at your maximum 1 hour power for 2 hours? And obviously, things like that happen as you get fitter. So, you know, as your thresholds nudge upwards, you might start scoring too much TSS for a given workout, and that is why we have to retest or use data given to us from, you know, race performances and things like that to adjust your thresholds accordingly, so that this TSS, you know, if you start the season at 250 watts and you end up being able to hold 300 watts, the TSS generated from earlier in the season will be, you know, will be way out from, you know, you'll be generating too much TSS, if you like, in each session. So, you know, that's the need for retesting, if you like. So, anything done as a maximal 1 hour effort generates 100 TSS, and everything therefore is a derivative of that. So when you're looking at data from a session after you've done it, if you start doing a 1 hour workout and scoring 120 TSS, you know, you have to question that and go, well, something's not being pulled through properly through Training Peaks. The same thing if you've just done a hard 1 hour workout and you've only scored 40 TSS, what is it that it's not pulling through properly? And that's when it's worth, you know, if you can't figure it out yourself, get in touch. You know, we'll, you know, we've ironed out enough problems with people over time, so you know, we'll know where the problem lies. Sometimes it can actually be as simple as you can mistakenly set 2 sets of training zones for the same sport within your zones. I actually just noticed when I looked at mine a minute ago, for some reason there's 2 in there for me for run pace at the moment. So you know, that needs correcting. So and actually, just going on from that, if you do notice problems, Training Peaks does have a function where you can backtrack that data. I'll just quickly show it you because it's dead useful. If you notice your run heart rate has been miles out, and that's, you know, for some reason you don't use a watch and therefore it's always using heart rate data, you would actually be able to go into your chart, on the settings of the chart, go to recalculate TSS, select the sport, put in the threshold you want it to work with, whether that be bike power or run pace, etc., and a date range to work to, and you can backtrack it, because it's important, if you ever notice an anomaly, that you do correct at least the last 6 weeks, really, to make sure everything's lined up properly. So maybe that's a good point, you know, to move on to the chart, Chris. Maybe we could start on sort of like how the chart pulls the data together from each day's training, maybe.
Yeah, okay, cool. So we've got a number of different measures here. So in terms of training stress, you can see that all the red dots basically relate to the amount of training stress for that particular day. Now, other than looking at the session to make sure it makes sense, I would probably avoid that when looking at the chart. It's just giving a distribution of where they are. So you can see that, like, just to some significant outliers. So if you go to like November, for example, that's Phil doing an Ironman, and obviously why his TSS is so high for that particular day. You know, if you come down a little bit from there, Phil, where we had a big training day 3 weeks out, and the session was circa 4K swim, 170K bike with a 45-minute run off, you can see that he's accumulated like nearly well over 400 TSS in a day. But in the main, you know, for an age group athlete who's at the top of the sport, you're probably looking at, you know, circa, on average, 120 to 150 TSS per day. You'll obviously have big days where, I don't know, you've been out on your bike for 4 or 5 hours and you've accumulated, say, 60 TSS per hour, so you might come back with 300. But in the main, if you think about a normal day with work, and you're training twice a day, then you're probably going to accumulate 60, 65 in the morning and similar in the evening, give or take. So that's where your sort of 120 to 150 comes from. It's 2 times an hour at about 65 TSS every single day, pretty much. Yes, you probably have an easier day in there, and you'll probably have a bigger day or bigger days at the weekend, but that just gives you a little bit of a flavour of TSS per day. So then we've got basically three lines to look at. One is the pink line, which is it moves quite significantly because it's basically looking at your training load over 7 days. So it's basically taking an average of it's almost like short-term fitness. It's called acute training load. It's what you've moved in a week. So for example, if you normally create 100 TSS per week, and then you suddenly go 100 TSS per day, so 700 in a week, and you go away on a training camp like we did, we do a couple around March last year, Phil.
Just looking for it. Yeah, it's here. It's generally this part here. Yeah, or like the year before, like in March 2016, if you go back, you can see that we kind of create significant spikes in short-term fitness. And if you look at the blue line, which is your sort of like longer-term CTL, yes, it moves considerably from a training camp, but it doesn't move as much because the CTL is your average training load over 6 weeks. So it takes a lot of short-term work, if you like, to be able to move that in the same way as you can move your ATL or your 7 day fitness. So but you can see there that the benefits of going on a training camp, and you know, you could significantly move your fitness on, but it comes at a cost, and that's effectively your yellow line. So the difference between your short-term training load and your long-term training load is your training stress balance or your form. So as you can see, that when
he went away on a training camp last March. His short-term training load went through the roof, as you can see there. His fitness is gaining, but he is coming away from that training camp carrying a lot of fatigue, which is why the training stress balance is into the minuses, and quite significantly so. It's at like -50. So yes, you can, you know, if you get a week off work and you can get lots of training in, you can do a lot of training and it will help with your long-term fitness, but you almost don't get the benefit like straight away. But you'll also come away from that week quite fatigued generally. So that's one of the reasons why we talk about consistency in training, and actually carrying that amount of fatigue comes at a cost. And one of those is the risk of illness, and the second is risk to injury. That effectively your form is moving too quickly. So if you use your app on the phone, it's got some quite good data at the top. I don't know whether it shows it on here, Phil, in terms of like 7 days, 14 days.
It doesn't show it as well. Your phone shows your ramp rate much better, doesn't it? So
yeah, but we're effectively looking for a ramp rate of around about 4 to 5 per week, if possible. You know, as soon as we start to move and your training stress balance starts to move beyond -30, but probably even -10, there is a risk that if you do that over long term, that your fitness is kind of moving too quickly. Now, some people can get away with it. You know, if it was somebody like myself who's been training for 25 years at Triathlon, and I was down at 80 CTL, and I've been used to it being sat at 150, then moving from 80 to 100 is probably not a problem. It will probably not cause me too many problems. But you know, if you're new to the sport and you're trying to gain fitness too quickly, then it can have an impact. And so, you know, and also there is a ceiling to where you can reach. And so, to give you, you know, if we were highly critical of, you know, Phil's year last year, you can see that, Phil, if you just show the build from January to March, that actually Phil was at his fittest, before then, go back a little bit, that little spike there, around the end of March. And then, although he managed to maintain the training load through May, you know, you could even say all the way through to July, it never was at the level of March. And so, actually, could he have had a much shallower ramp to that number, and not carried that fatigue that he had, you know, back in sort of March or April. So, you know, that's just, you can only kind of look back over the data and go, okay, that's what happened last year, and this is what we're going to do this year. It was a new year for us, and if you can see that the ramp rates, or the training stress of, this is like 2 years worth of data, by the way, that you can see that the peaks.
That's like the end of a year there. So that to the left of my cursor is 2016, and then that is 2017. Carry on.
So you can see that like the training stress from 2017 compared to 2016 was in a whole different world, and so sometimes you don't actually know what level you can get to before it's too much. And this is probably the case in terms of 2017, that you could say he pretty much maxed out at 150. He was able to maintain it for a short while through the end of March through to July, and then we had this planned rest after Edinburgh 70.3 around the 2nd of July, I think it was. We had a couple of weeks off where we did nothing, and then we were trying to build towards the Ironman in Florida in November. And as you can see, we never really reached the levels that we got to back in March or July. And, you know, questionably, you would expect probably more CTL from Ironman training than what we were doing previously. So, you know, as we head into 2018 and the data, you can see that, you know, he's had a good break, and his fitness has dropped down significantly. He's had a lot of recovery, and as you can see that, yeah, he's been busy at work, but his ramp rate is a lot less steep. I mean, it's early days. We're only like 10 days into January, but the fitness build is a lot slower. He's trying to peak in September rather than from May to July. So his fitness will just sort of build very slowly over the course of the year, ready to peak in September. And I doubt he will have a break as he's had that year. He might do, depending on where he kind of gets to. So I've spoken for a bit there. Phil, have you got anything to add?
No, I think you covered off everything like up to that point, really. I suppose, you know, what Chris is really getting at there is this chart is all the data of your training over a very long period of time. And in the end, it does two things. It tells you where you're up to at any given time in terms of, is your fitness moving upwards, which is the trend we always want. But also it provides all of this historical data as well to look back and analyze in following seasons. You know, could I do more training? Could I reach a better place? Did I time it a bit wrong? You know, and you can see, you know, us guys are racing at a reasonably high level in the UK, and there's a few mistakes in there that we've looked at and gone, what can we do different? And we're always trying to bet. You know, you're trying to better yourself, aren't you? So this is it's a really good tool to review your year or 2 years or you know, and you know, not make the same mistake twice, basically. So yeah, there's probably one other thing we didn't touch on, Chris. I was actually leaving it for the end, but it's when you are doing quite a lot of indoor training at this time of year. I'll give you an example. At the moment, I'm running on the treadmill an awful lot. My watch tells me I'm running slower than I really would be on the road for the given effort. Therefore, the TSS that's generated is slightly lower than it should be. It depends how much volume you're doing indoors. I'm doing nearly everything indoors at the moment on the treadmill at this time of year. So I'm just rolling with it. It's generating a bit less TSS. Next winter, I'll probably be doing a lot indoors at the same time of year. So over the year, the data trend is the same, is my take on it. If you were doing a weird spell of indoor stuff in a random July, then maybe you just need to change your threshold accordingly to generate about the right TSS, because it's important that the numbers are coming out approximately right. Once you've dealt with this data enough, you sort of know how to make these adjustments. But again, we're here if you need any advice on anything like that. The turbo trainer can also do it when it's giving you your threshold might be slightly lower indoors than it is outdoors. And again, we probably all use the turbo a lot in the winter, so I'd probably just accept the data is what it is, and it'll be the same each winter. So does that make sense to everyone?
Yeah.
Look, let's have a few questions from people, because I'm sure we've got it, and if we think of anything else, then we can kind of add it to this. But fire away with questions, guys. Sean?
Yeah, just the TSS. I understand all the data, what it's showing now, but what does it actually mean to me? So say on a week I've done a 130 every day or whatever it is. Is that just building towards managing that as a cumulative for the week or the month and saying you shouldn't be going higher than this, or is it on a daily basis, say if you do too much you like to get injury, or what's it telling me at the the outturn of it all? Have I missed the point of what it is?
No, it's basically, yes, it's a cumulative total that adds up over time. So if I just highlight a number here, my current fitness on the 5th of March last year was 132, which means I've averaged 132 TSS for the 6 weeks prior to that point. When I move on one day, or I'll go on 3 days, it's got up to 135. What it's done, it's knocked off the first 3 days and added on the next 3 days. So it's just a running. It's a running cumulative total is where this blue line is coming from. And the same.
Right, okay, yeah.
The same with the pink line. The pink line is a 7-day cumulative total, rather than a 6-week cumulative. Hence why it's got bigger variation in it. And also, so it goes up quicker, but it also drops out quicker as well. Whereas it takes longer to drop on your CTL, which is your chronic training load. And then in terms
of make a few. Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, in terms of managing your load, yeah, the data, yeah, you might generally rack up, I don't know, 600 TSS points in a week, doing, I don't know, something like 10 hours training. If you suddenly go on a training camp and do 30 hours, you're going to rack up 2,000 TSS points, and it's going to send your pink line through the roof, your blue line is going to jump up very sharply, and that's when your ramp rate is too great. And actually, once your ramp rate becomes more than about 8 in a week, i.e. your fitness, your blue line jumps 8 points in 1 week, you're treading into the danger zone of becoming ill and injured. Now, like Chris was saying, different people with different backgrounds in the sport can deal with going over that ramp rate for shorter periods of time better than others. And I think it depends on your background. And that's something, again, to speak on an individual basis about. And, you know, we wouldn't really be expecting many of our athletes to be hitting, you know, numbers in the 140, 150 region, really, because their background isn't deep enough in the sport to tolerate it. And I suppose on that note, you know, I think we always say to athletes that one of the things that we like people to accept from the start of working with us is that you're on a bit of a journey that's more than just your next A race. It takes time to learn, you know, for your body to tolerate load. As you can see, even myself, you know, many years into the sport, you look at one half of that chart, which is 1 year, and the next half, I've learned to tolerate more load over those 2 years. So, you know, sometimes it's about thinking about the long term of where you're going to be in 12 months, 24 months, 36 months. And this chart helps you manage that load quite well.
I think there's also some other interesting things here as well. First of all, it's the fact that, you know, of how your life is set up. You know, myself and Phil, we are set up to be quite selfish. You know, we have jobs where we work from home. We don't have like kids as a responsibility on a sort of day-to-day basis, and our lives are set up around, excuse me, triathlon performance. And so obviously that makes things a whole lot easier when it comes to, you know, creating or getting fit. The other thing to bear in mind here is this is just data, and it doesn't take into consideration life stress, work stress, family, how many hours sleep you got that evening, and all of those things. And so, you know, for myself and Phil, our lives are set up around getting 9 hours a night sleep, eating as well as possible, minimizing stress from outside of training stress, and all of those things. So, you know, you have to be realistic about, you know, what it is you can tolerate. But one of the things we have to do is we have to sometimes like push the boundaries and see if we can move things on. And, you know, it might be that you get to 100 TSS and you know, you start to get ill and broken down, and we have to, you know, try and think about, yes, is it just training stress, or are there other things going on that we can tackle, like, you know, good nutrition or something like that. The other thing to bear in mind is that training load per day can be created in lots of different ways. So, for example, if you didn't work and you went out on your bike for 3 hours a day and you rode very easy, you would probably create 150 TSS. One, you wouldn't be very good at swimming and running if you didn't do any. But two, if you only went out and you rode easy for 3 hours, then yes, you would have a high CTL score in comparison to most. But if you hadn't done any top end work, VO2 work and threshold work, then your ability to be able to do that would be fairly limited. So this is only an indication of where your perceived fitness is. And it's quite a useful tool to use for that, based on the fact that we try and put in quite a lot of quality into the training, but it's not the be all and end all. It's just a way of trying to measure fitness. And what it does do, that when you do look back over time, things start to make sense, and it helps to explain why things have gone the way they've gone, if you're honest with yourself and you really look back over the year and go, okay, this happened, this could have been better, this race went okay, that race didn't go okay, and there can be lots of reasons, and I do think that the chart does help to give you answers for those kinds of things, but it's absolutely not the be all and end all. Any other questions from anyone? It's all gone quiet. I've got one more point, Phil. I don't know whether you've got much more to say, but one of the things we kind of talked about before was training stress balance and this kind of number under negative, that we do want to be in the minuses with training stress balance, but the ideal zone to try and stay in is -10 to -30.
So just highlighting this, it's on the right hand side of the chart, the numbers here. There's 0, and Chris is talking about sort of here down to here at the moment. Yeah, carry on, Chris. Sorry.
Yeah, so when you're in that zone of like -10 to -30, your ramp rate is heading in the right direction but not too steep, and you're gaining fitness. If your training stress balance is positive, then your CTL is not heading in the right direction. So they're the kind of numbers you need to be looking at. If you start to see, you know, -40s, -50s, or even like -30s, then you know, by all means, like, just ask the question and make sure that like all the data's right, and the coach is happy with where you are and you're passing your comments back. If we keep seeing like -30 and in all the comments is I'm knackered, I didn't hit the numbers, and we start to get a little bit of a picture about actually like something's not quite right, so you know, we can adjust the plan. And that's one of the reasons why we only write 1 week at a time, so that we can adjust the plan based on, you know, how people are. If the comments are there, the comments are actually more important than telling us what the data was, because we can see that already. So you know, that's why that's particularly important. Yeah, -10 to -30. When we come to a race, we're looking for probably, depending on the person, around about +10 to +20, so that you can see that what on earth was that? Was that a race? That Peguera, yeah?
Yeah.
So you can see that Phil's had a good block of training in the lead up there. His training stress balance is down at whatever it is. I can't really see. and then minus 30s, around about that. And then he's started to back it off. You can see some like low training stress scores down at the bottom, a few recovery days, some very light training, and then he's gone into the race at plus 27, so pretty fresh. So again, you can kind of look back over data and go, okay, I raced quite well there. I wasn't as fresh as maybe I could have been. So it's just a good way of saying, okay, I seem to race better at plus 20 rather than plus 5, or and what you can do as a coach is you can plan the training and the training stress in advance so that it actually you can work out where the athlete will be come race day. So you know, we tend to use that tool quite a bit when we're planning our training to make sure that the athlete gets to what is their sort of like peak performance, if you like, based off their long-term fitness. So hopefully that's given you a little bit of a flavour. I'm surprised we haven't had any more questions. It's all been quite quiet at your end.
I'm just going through all my figures. I'm fascinated by the last year. Sorry, I'm listening as well. But yeah, it's really useful. It's just seeing all the peaks of all the stuff you're talking about now. I'm just looking back over the last year and just seeing it all as well. So it's good to be able to relate it back to my own year, if you like, of where I thought I'd done well and why, and other areas where I've tailed off as well. So no, it's really, really useful.
Yeah, and definitely that if you bring up 2 years worth of data and like that is there, then hopefully, you know, you can see that, you know, you were fitter for longer in terms of last year, or as you say, it starts to explain things and how we can approach things differently. So, you know, one of the things I say to my athletes is that when we have a call together, i.e. a physical conversation, that these are some of the things that you should probably try and plan in advance. In terms of what you want to ask me, I'm quite happy to have a general conversation about how life is and how work is and all the rest of it for you. But at the same time, that you should try and absolutely maximise your time in that conversation. So, you know, these should be some of the questions that start to come out, like, why is this the way it is, or can you explain that, and just sort of plan for that conversation so that you absolutely maximize the time, because, you know, part of our job is to write the training plan. Absolutely, it's your job to do the work and get it done to the maximum of your ability. But actually, you know, coaching is more about the one-to-one conversations and picking up as much information as you can in that 20 to 30 minute conversation that you will have with your coach. So you know, start to think about those kind of things when you have those conversations.
Just on that same note, Chris, as well, just a reminder to everyone, you know, the feedback function on Training Peaks is you know, is an easy way of doing that on a daily basis. Oh, I've got a question about the session I've just done, or I've got a, you know, just use that feedback thing to keep, you know, I mean, I know me and Chris use it all the time with our athletes, you know, pretty much up to date every 24 hours. So it's really worth just really using that feature. And, you know, that I'll give you a really good example of it. I've had a few athletes this week just come off the back of like 10 days of a lot of intensity. And we were going to go for 2 weeks of intensity, and they've got to halfway through this week, and I can tell by their comments that they're just about to fall off a cliff. I could look at their chart and find that data out, but you know, when, you know, if they're telling me they feel fine, then I'll roll with it. But it's their comments are more important for us to be reactive as coaches as well. So you know, if you need a bit of advice on scaling back a session the next day and stuff like that, you know, use that and be honest about how you feel as well. You know, you refer to your own chart. You can back up how you feel with the data sometimes. But you know, it's just we're in a period of the year where we do a lot of high intensity, and you just have to keep us up to speed. You know, certainly within a few days of how you're feeling all the time. So.
Sean, did you have another question, or Chris? I saw that yours came up.
No, go on. If Chris was going, you go, Chris.
Yeah, it was just touching on when Phil mentioned about doing treadmill work, doing quite a bit of treadmill work, and the TSS not being quite the same as what it would be on the road. How would you adjust that manually, or try and estimate that figure manually, or would you just leave it and let it balance out across a year?
I think if it's only I had one the other day, right, and I did 9 times 2 minutes, and I probably felt like I was running at 5:20, 5:30 miles, but my watch was picking it up at like 7.5 miles or something ridiculous. So I looked at the overall score, and and it came back at like 57, and I physically just manually moved it up a little bit towards 65 or 70. It's going to make a little bit of a difference. It's not going to necessarily be as big as you think. 9 times 2 minutes meant that I was running for 18 minutes hard. The rest of it was easy. So I'm not going to suddenly create a TSS of 95 or something. So you've got to be realistic about what you think what that score might be. And it's probably moving, circa, 5 to 10, if we're honest. But I think it's better off to have your road. I believe having your road power and your pace on the road as your threshold, and that you just manually move it up for the odd treadmill session, or I wouldn't do anything on the turbo. I'd leave it as it is. As Phil said, it becomes the norm. A couple of turbo sessions during the week and a ride at the weekend. So that's how I would do it. Just have a look at like where the data, what your watch was recording for the fast stuff versus like what the treadmill speed was, or versus like how it felt, and then go, okay, I was running for 15 or 20 minutes. What does that really mean? But be honest with yourself when you don't just put a number down because we're trying to like move CTL in the right direction. Just manually move it a little bit is kind of my advice.
Okay, fine. And then just touching back on that swim one, you mentioned about the swim TSS. Is it better just to leave your Garmin running even when you just if you're doing interval stuff like today, whereas I had 4 times 100 max with 2 minutes rest in between, to just leave your watch running and let your TSS, would your TSS drop as your watch stays running?
I wouldn't necessarily use the watch at all and just use the pace clock. If you're swimming at Total Fitness and you've done the session, then just manually put in the TSS as opposed to if you've got a session that's sort of like, I don't know, I'm making it up now, 9 300s as the main set, then you're not really messing around too much with the watch, like pressing start and stop. But if you've suddenly got 120 times 25s, you're having to stop it at the end of the length and start it at the start of every single length of those 120. 1, it becomes tiresome. 2, it means that 120 pushes off the wall are suboptimal, and every finish to the end of every length is going to be suboptimal as well. So in that instance, I would definitely not wear the watch. That's my advice. People still wear them. People ignore it, and that I'm cool with that. It's kind of up to you.
I suppose it's just an overall pacing thing, really. Why I wear a watch for swimming, really.
Just elaborate.
More so than
elaborate on that a bit.
More so than. So I suppose me seeing looking at distance stuff, I'd like to see what I'm doing per 100 metres or 100 yards, and I'm looking at that figure, I suppose, as much as figures for 100 metres or 75 metres or 50 metres. So I suppose that's the only reason I wear it.
Yeah, look, I mean, my advice is that, like, you know, learning feel, learning, you know, if you're turning around on 6 minutes and, you know, you're coming in on 5:20s or whatever, that you start to learn what feel is. You know, that's a lot easier for me to say when I've been swimming since I was like 5 or 6 and doing sessions like that. So I understand it. And so, you know, whilst we kind of say, right, don't wear it, I get why you would and why it kind of works for you. So if it works for you, then keep doing it.
Chris, just
maybe just leave it for the intervals, I suppose. Don't worry about it for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On Phil.
I would just say this sort of harks back to something else we've spoken about already, about, you know, not getting too hung up on the numbers during a session as well. An example I've had this week is I had a hard swim yesterday morning where you're swimming at 120 per 100 pace. Sorry, Chris, someone got some very bad background noise going on there.
Might be me.
Yeah, sorry, mate. It's pretty loud.
Put yourself on mute and then just and then put yourself back off. It's like the toilet's flushing.
Chris, I've muted him. What I was saying then was, you know, one day you're swimming at 120 per 100, then the next day I get in the pool this morning, tired from that session. To start with, doing a steady aerobic workout, I think I'm swimming at 130 100, and I'm actually swimming at 137 100 on the first 300. But you don't get too hung up on that, because it's still, you know, let yourself feel your way into the session. By the time I got halfway through the session, I was swimming my normal pace for the given effort. But sometimes getting too hung up on these numbers in any of the sports means you push too hard too early in the session. And when we are training on a really regular basis, you need to be quite relaxed, especially in the first half of any given session, just to you know, not try and fight for numbers that aren't there. If you like, you know, early in the morning, the pool, you're a bit stiff, you're a bit tired from the day before. Just let it come. So that, you know, that's just an offshoot of the, you know, we're going off on a bit of a tangent there, but just a reminder to not get.
It goes back to the email that you got this morning, Chris, regarding, yes, the data's there, which is fine and great, but actually, you know, don't get too hung up on it. You know, especially when, you know, it's pretty steady stuff. You know, there's certain times where we might want to know a bit of data, you know, power tests and, you know, and the very hard sessions, like what the numbers are. But sometimes it's there and sometimes it's not. So, but I think the key thing is do what's right for you regarding the Garmin. Melissa, did you have a question?
Sorry, yeah, I was just trawling back through Training Peaks, and I've got some master sessions, and there's one I swim sort of about 2,600 yards, and it says that I've got a sort of a TSS of 50, which, given you're saying maximum effort for an hour is going to be, say, 65. Looking at the figures I've got, they do seem quite reasonable if I sort of look at, because if I can, I write down what I've done. So in that respect, they do seem quite reasonable, looking at what the Garmin's recorded. Because I find that I'm useless. I can't see what the Garmin says, so I have to start it when I get in and stop it when I get out, and I just have to let it run. And I seem to looking at what I've got, I'm getting a reasonable score off that. So I think for me, it's probably better to use it in that fashion rather than worry about messing around with it and then recording rubbish.
Yeah,
Chris, I'll just jump in here quickly. So yeah, interesting to note that, Mel. And yeah, I think when we looked at your TSS in depth last year because of a problem with it, your swim was generating about the right amount. I probably wasn't aware that you were doing it by just starting at the start and ending at the end. However, I obviously also know those master sessions from living in Shrewsbury, and they are quite they're very interval based sessions. So it's pretty interesting that, you know, by using the watch the way you are, and the fact that you are stood at the end of the pool, probably I would say more than you would in a normal endurance session for sure. I'd say 50 is probably a very fair score there. You know, and it probably is. It probably is generating the right amount of TSS. So good.
Yeah, when I've looked at the times that I've actually been stood there, I was quite shocked how much I did clearly stand there. You know, I'd say probably 45 minutes was swimming and 15 minutes was obviously the turnaround. However, it's useful to know, you know, relative to when I actually swim on my own, and I do swim it continuously. So in that respect, it was a useful thing to see, for me to see, really.
Yeah, just on a very individual basis, Mel, just feed back to me next time you do a more continuous swim on your own. Let's just give me a comparative bit of data to, you know, just highlight it to me in a feedback, please. So, Sean, have you got another question?
Yeah, so just on swimming again. Is it during the form? Is it normal for that not to really dip to the sort of levels that you'd expect to see on the main chart if you've gone like through a heavy, I don't know, running and biking set? I'm obviously tying some swims in there, but the reason I'm asking is I've just separated out my swims to see what it's doing over the past year, and all my form is generally higher than my pink all the way through, even though my fitness has increased. So I just wondered if that was just because it doesn't calculate a heart rate or a power, or why it would be higher.
So interestingly, I mean, this is probably one to take up with Chris on an individual basis, but when I have seen single sport data do that before, and it's a little bit confusing. My other half's a runner, and I've seen her data generate the pink and the orange line the wrong way round, even though the blue line is going up. So I think it's to do. I think from memory, it's to do with the scaling on the side of the chart changes.
Right.
But I'd have to have a close look. I'm sure Chris would be able to iron it out for you as well. But I think it's the scaling moves on one side, and it makes it look like it's doing something it's not. So.
All right, yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to ask a personal question about it. Just
No,
if there was a
no, it's obviously just it could take a little bit of time to solve that one. So probably why. Hence,
okay.
Yeah. So I'm sure Chris will get to the bottom of it for you. So.
I finally got a question for him now. Then tomorrow.
Yeah, there you go. Write that down for you. Cool. Anyone else, or are we close to wrapping it up?
Right, thanks guys. We've been on an hour, so yeah, hopefully that's been useful. You know, if any of you guys have got any subjects that you want covering off, then please just drop myself and Bill an email with anything, and we'll try and deep dive into it in a little bit more detail. Otherwise, it's just being driven a lot more by us. So yeah, if you have anything, then give us a shout, and we'll try and cover it off in the next few weeks. Otherwise, we'll be back on in 2 weeks' time.
Cool.
All right, night guys.
Night guys.
Cheers.
Thanks, guys. Cheers.
Bye. Bye.
Oh, I'm going to say good night now. That's pretty good. I'm going to get some sleep because I didn't get sleep till about midnight.
Sorry, dude, I can't actually hear you very well.